Okay, so my name is Nick Bartlow. I work for a company called Nobless, where I am an engineer and lead developer. Nobless is a science and technology organization that does development, testing, and research, as well as some consulting in the public sector. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call great festivities, or great technologies, and specifically UI testing within Jenkins for Griffin applications using FEST framework. So it's kind of cool to see the Netflix presentations because they had a lot of content in there that had to do with Groovy. So we like to use Groovy a lot too. In particular, we also like to use Griffin as well. So I'm going to walk around a little bit so I can see some of the stuff. But I guess, has anyone in here used Griffin before, out of curiosity? Okay, cool. So we do have at least one person here. So Griffin is a application framework that allows you to rapidly develop Java applications, desktop applications, using both Java and Groovy. So if you've heard of perhaps Grails before, Grails is the web side of things. Griffin is the desktop application side of things. So they're kind of sister frameworks. FEST is a testing framework that allows you to basically drive swing applications in an automated fashion and validate functionality UI test. I guess if anyone in here has ever done UI testing before, there's a quote in the Griffin in Action book from main contributor and author of the book, Andres O'Meara. It says, UI testing is not for the faint of heart. I can tell you UI testing in Jenkins doesn't really make it much easier. It's also not for the faint of heart. But it's very valuable if you can get things in place, and it allows you to build a lot of confidence in the software that you're putting out. So with that in mind, start with kind of some of the required tooling that's necessary in order for someone to use a system kind of like we did. Basically what we did is we've got a couple custom scripts that allow us to wrap the execution of some Griffin test execution. Then we've got a Groovy script that basically slices and dices video that we've recorded as our UI tests are executed. And then finally we just have a shell script which just kind of puts it all together and allows us to generate some reports that can be displayed in typical reporting fashion in the Jenkins UI, as well as pushing around some videos if you want to do things like move them over to a SAN and then view them after the fact. But below that you see kind of all of the different tooling, so a lot of the great tooling that you see. So Groovy and Griffin obviously required. If you're interested in maintaining multiple versions of Groovy, multiple versions of Griffin, Rails, Gradle, any of those things, there's a tool called GVM, which is a Groovy Environment Manager. We find that to be pretty useful. Basically it allows you to do just that, maintain multiple versions of any one of those great technology frameworks on a machine and switch back and forth, set defaults, things like that. So that works out pretty good for configuring your slaves. Beyond that, we use a freely available tool called VNC to FLV. So when you're running these tests in Jenkins, you're running them typically on headless nodes, but you need to go ahead and create VNC sessions in order to be able to test the desktop application. And along those lines, that tool allows you to record those VNC sessions to FLV files, which is just a video format. And then finally we use FFmpeg, another freely available tool, which allows you to edit videos. In this case, we're just splitting them up. So basically, if you've got a test class that has multiple tests, we break it up so you don't have to view the whole video. You can just view a particular test across your complete test class. And then just finally, VLC Media Player. That's a freely available video player that would allow you to view videos that have been recorded, and then Ant to put together some test results. So for the purposes of this, we decided we would just go with a sample Griffin app here at the conference. This is a trivial application called Font Picker, which all it does is it basically displays a really simple Java Swing application where you've got a main panel right here, which looks up all of the different fonts that are available on the local system that it's running. You can go ahead and change a few things down at the bottom, such as the size, some of the styling, so bold and italicized, and then change the sample text. And when you make those changes, the main panel updates and you can see what it looks like. So I can assure you we build applications that are a little bit more interesting than this, but this is good for the purposes of demonstration. So what we're going to do is we're going to just put together some tests that allow you to ensure that when you change those things, like the size, the style, or the sample text, that the main panel is updating appropriately, right? And I won't have time to get too far into the code, but what I'll do is I'll bring up a couple of these things, and it is looking like resolution's a little bit large here, but hopefully you guys can see here. So what we've got right here is a FEST class called font picker, or excuse me, this is the view. So in Griffin we've got a model view controller set up. So you've got views, which this is basically exactly what you were seeing on that screen before, where you can see down here we've got the definition of the main panel right in this area, and then a few more panels which included the sliders and the buttons to change the italics or the bold, and then the sample text as well. So that's just the view. Moving on real quick, we've got the test class that we've run in Jenkins. We called it font picker tests. All it's going to do is we've got three main tests here. One is to test the size update. Another one is to test the style update. And then finally, we've got test the sample text update. So what you do is, again, you use this framework called FEST, where you can basically look up UI components. So in this case, we'll take and we'll find the slider in our main frame. And then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through three different values here: the minimum, the middle size, and then the maximum on the slider. And we're going to make sure that the components within get updated properly using a function just called check panels after update. Again, all this stuff will be available on a Bitbucket site, which is referenced at the end of the slide, so you can see it. So don't get too worried if you don't get to consume all this right here. And then finally, I'll get into this real quick, but FEST Runner is, again, it's just basically a wrapper that allows us to execute specific Griffin test execution commands. So Griffin test stack integration, for instance, will allow you to run a particular FEST test, and we wrap it for some reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later on here. Video edit, again, this allows us to break apart the different portions of the video based on the tests within the test class. So in this case, we had 3 tests in our test class, and that will result in 3 different videos from the long play of all of them together. And then finally, Festival here is just a shell script, which will be the basis of our Jenkins job, which does the different things there. So moving forward right there, to set things up, it's pretty simple. You've got to just go ahead and create at least one Jenkins slave. I mean, you could run it on master just as well, but generally not a great practice. Make sure you've got some sort of a repository in place. So if you wanted to run this, you can go download Griffin. Font Picker is bundled within the framework, so that sample's right there, and then create the Jenkins job. The job setup's pretty simple. Standard stuff, so you'll want some sort of trigger, or you can just run it ad hoc, through the UI or through the API. We'll talk about the environment on the next slide, but really all it includes is one build step. It's just a shell step or bash execution step, and all it does is you're just going to go out to the workspace in question, run festival.sh, and in this case we're using an example where we only put one parameter, which is just the name of the class, so font picker. So if you were to run Griffin test app integration font picker, it's going to run through all of those tests that we created in that class. And then what you'll want to do is you'll go ahead and put in a couple post-build actions to give yourself access to the reports. So we put in 2 different sections there. One of them is to put together basically the JUnit results, which give you the nice little trend graph over on the main page of a job. But then also we have a published HTML report section, which is available via plugin, where you can see the actual FEST test results. So if you were to run this thing locally, FEST creates basically a HTML output, and that gives you access to that. So the environments, I talked a little bit about this before. For your slaves, you need to make sure your Griffin, Groovy, and whatnot are installed. But beyond that, you need to make sure that you've got a VNC server on the slave that you're going to run this on. So depending on what OS you've got, there's plenty of different options right there. The other thing too, VNC to FLV, we talked about that. That's the recording tool. FFmpeg for slicing and dicing. And then again, there's a little bit more detailed steps in the wiki that we've got up on the Bitbucket site. With respect to the environment variables, there's several things that need to be put in place when you're using Griffin and Groovy and things like that. So Java home, Griffin home, all those different types of things, and the path variable obviously needs to be set. There's so many different ways to do that in Jenkins, and most folks in this room, I'm sure, know how to do that. So go with whatever you like best. Beyond that, what I'll do is I'll just kind of show you a real quick example of what the reports look like. So this is what a FEST report looks like. Looks like your standard run of the unit JUnit report, where in this case we would have 3 different tests that executed. So we've got test size update, test style update, test sample text update. Shows you how long they run and success. But kind of the key, and I think one of the important takeaways of this is you can only do so much debugging of UI tests looking solely at the output of the unit tests and standard error, standard out. And many times what you find is you get stuck on stuff, and being able to review those videos when you've got a particularly insidious test that just keeps on failing is really valuable. So what we've done is I've just created put together a couple examples of what it actually looks like running on the slave, and I will bring those up real quick here. So this one is test style update, and I'll just go through it real quick here. Hopefully that shows up at the right style. So this is what the test looks like when it's actually running on the slave itself. It takes a few seconds to boot up Griffin, but you can see you've got a CentOS background right there. Font picker comes up. We start modifying the styles. So again, the FEST test is automatically driving the UI. So in this case, we selected both bold and italic. Now we undid italic, undid bold. Now we undid the other one. And you can see the main panel was updating as we went ahead and did that. So if you want to take a look at it afterward, there's various assertions that are going on in the check main panel update to assert that those changes that we're seeing go on right there actually end up happening. So that's basically what it looks like in the best case. There's plenty of really things to look at when it doesn't end up in the best case, but I don't really have much time to talk about that today. So I'm really going to get into what I think is the most valuable section within this whole presentation. Pretty much anybody in here, I'm sure, could have figured out all the stuff leading up to here without much trouble. This took us a little bit of time and investment as we were going through and maturing our UI test pipeline. So the battle scars, really. So number one, why can't we just use Griffin test app integration? Why did we need to use the FEST test runner? Well, the test app integration doesn't accommodate the linkage to the VNC server, so we needed to basically manage that display variable and wrap it. That was reason number one. Reason number two, if you've ever used FEST before, at least with respect to Griffin, sometimes what happens is your component hierarchies end up sticking around between tests within a test class, and that can put a bollocks on your results and lead to intermittent failures. The next one, you're thinking here, hey, we're using VNC. We might want to use the XVNC plugin within Jenkins to provide that for each test and spin it up for each session. We started out doing that, and for the most part it worked fine, but what we found was that there was an interesting timing interaction going on where sometimes the VNC server would start up for a job, but it wouldn't actually become available prior to the time that we started recording the tests. So we ended up getting socket errors with VNC to FLV, and it was very intermittent and it was very difficult to diagnose. So watch out for that. Our solution to that was we don't use the plugin anymore at this point. We just restart the service by hand with a prepare environment variables section in our job, and that seemed to make the problem go away, which was nice. The next thing here, let's see here. Again, watch the videos. So this was kind of interesting in that your desktop environment and your Windows managers can run into, or can lead you into some really interesting things where, like, you might have a screensaver that kicks on, you might have an automatic update window that kicks on, and that'll pop up in front of your UI, and then the mouse won't be able to click on whatever it is you're trying to click on. And if you don't watch the videos, you never know that. It's very difficult to see just from the test reports. One final thing here too, you find that maybe your videos are too big. A couple things that we found here, we were running CentOS nodes for our slaves, and by default, CentOS has got this really pretty blue gradient background, right? Turns out that doesn't compress all that well. So we ended up at one point in time with videos that were, on the order of several gigs for not that long, 20, 30 seconds. We're like, what's going on here? We changed that to black. That dropped it down a lot, and then you can also change some things like compression settings. So that definitely helps a lot as well. So real quick, just some to-dos, and then I'll wrap up here. Concurrency and things like that. So we run several UI tests at once using the multi-job plugin, and this is very much in line with what you guys have seen already today, so I'll skip it. To-dos though, we're thinking about writing a Griffin plugin for Jenkins. Again, Grails is already there. There's a plugin for that, so it'd be pretty easy extension for that, and then we could probably build some of this stuff in. And then beyond that, again, the supplemental materials are available if you guys want to take a look. And with that, thanks to the sponsors. Great conference. Thanks for sticking around for this. All right, thank you very much.